Okay. All right. So this is our presentation on cellular respiration and photosynthesis. First, we have the table of contents, which just goes over like what's in the slides. So there's key terms, what cellular respiration is, the steps of cellular respiration, the uses, and some modifications to cellular respiration because there's like different types of cellular respiration, and when cellular respiration fails. And similarly, we have the same thing for photosynthesis, where it's like what it is, the steps, the uses, modifications, and when it fails, so what happens. So first, I'm going to go over some key terms that will probably come up later. So the first one is ATP, which is like pretty commonly known as like the energy that the cell uses. It's a it's adenosine triphosphate, and it's the body's main source of energy at like a cellular level by powering many reactions. Similar to ATP, GTP is very similar. It's just a different molecule that's attached to it. So it also powers reactions. A lot of there's these four acronyms. So it's NADH slash NAD plus and FADH2 or FADH. These are electron carriers. So when no electrons are attached, it's NAD plus or FADH. And when you put an electron on, it's NADH slash FADH2. And phosphorylation just means adding a phosphate group onto a molecule. And oxidation is the removal of an electron, and reduction is the addition of an electron. And the way that you can remember that is when you add an electron, you're reducing the charge. All right, next is what is cellular respiration?
So cellular respiration is the process to break down food into energy. They are important because ATP molecules are used to power cellular process as energy. It helps maintain homeostasis by regulating energy productions. ATP helps repair any damage in the body and build new molecules. It helps to remove waste products from our body. Oh, we can remember ATP as a sound that helps us produces energy to function. Without APT, we won't be able to function and it can lead to death. How it works is that the cell will break down the glucose in order for oxygen to produce ATP energy into the body to function. This includes muscle contractions for movement, helps the brain function, and cell division and growth in new cells.
And next is the steps of cellular respiration.
Okay, so the first stage of cellular respiration is glycolysis. So glycolysis, it's broken down into two. So the suffix of lysis, we know that something is being broken down. And in this case, it's like glucose, or glycol, which is where glycolysis comes from. So glycolysis takes place in the cytosol, which is the liquid part of the cell, or kind of like the majority of the cell. And the step within glycolysis is the investment phase, or the ATP requiring phase, in which two ATPs are used. Um, so cellular respiration is kind of like an investment. So they put the ATP in, and in this phase, the glucose or the C6H12O6, which is the focus of kind of the stuff of glycolysis, um, that is attached with two phosphates from the two ATP with this help of hang on, phospho-fructokinesis. And then that creates the PGAL. And then the payoff phase is where the pyruvate comes in, and that converts one 6-carbon molecule of glucose into two 3-carbon molecules of pyruvate. Um, and this is like in the mitochondria, and there's oxidation involved.
All right, and then we're moving on to the Krebs cycle.
Okay, so the Krebs cycle helps turns food into energy, and it takes place in the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell. This cycle is a key part of cellular respiration and the process our bodies use to make energy. So the cycle starts with acetyl-CoA, which is a molecule that comes from the breakdown of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. And acetyl-CoA combines with oxaloacetate to form citric acid, and this is why it's called the citric acid cycle. And then next, a series of reactions occur which rearrange molecules and release energy. The energy is released in the form of three key molecules, which is NADH and FADH2, which help make more energy later, and ATP, which is used for immediate energy, and CO2, which we breathe out as waste. And then at the end, oxaloacetate is regenerated, so the cycle can repeat over and over. The Krebs cycle matters because it produces a lot of energy and is part of aerobic respiration, meaning it only works in the presence of oxygen. And without the Krebs cycle, our cells wouldn't be able to efficiently convert food into usable energy.
All right. And next is oxidative phosphorylation.
So oxidative phosphorylation is the final step in cellular respiration, and this is the step that generates the most energy, and this is a step that happens in the mitochondria, which is why it's commonly known as the powerhouse of the cell. So in oxidative phosphorylation, what happens is that the NADH and FADH2 that's generated from the Krebs cycle is delivered, and electron carriers take these electrons and pass them through the electron transport chain, which creates a proton gradient. And so this is generated by moving the protons out of the matrix and into the intermembrane space. And so all the positive hydrogen ions will be concentrated outside. And as they come back into the mitochondria through the ATP synthase, they generate energy that allows for ADP to be turned into ATP as shown in the diagram.
All right. And then next we have the uses and modifications of cellular respiration.
So modifications is basically when an intermediate molecule is utilized and changed within the metabolic processes. And this basically allows them to adapt to certain needs and a lot of metabolic versatility, energy production, regulations, and homeostasis. And basically, CLA is modified into fatty acids for fatty acid synthesis, ketone bodies, amino acids, cholesterol, and steroid hormones. And then pyruvate is modified into a lactate for lactic acid fermentation, ethanol for alcoholic fermentation, glucose for glycolysis, gluconeogenesis, and oxaloacetate for citric acid cycle and the also gluconeogenesis.
All right, next we have fermentation.
Okay, so the definition is a metabolic process where microorganisms like yeast or bacteria would break down their carbohydrates, also known as their sugars, in the absence of oxygen, converting them into simpler organic compounds like alcohol or organic acids, while still producing carbon dioxide and generating a small amount of energy for the organism. The steps of fermentation would start with glycolysis, and this is the initial step of fermentation. And this is where glucose is broken down into pyruvate, which is the product, and it generates a small amount of ATP, which is the energy for the cell or the energy that the cell uses. Pyruvate conversion is the second step, and depending on the type of fermentation, pyruvate is further converted into the desired end product. So, for example, in ethanol fermentation, pyruvate is converted to ethanol and carbon dioxide.
And next we have what happens when cellular respiration fails.
If cellular respiration were to fail, the cells wouldn't be able to produce enough ATP, which is the cell's primary energy. Some effects of cellular respiration failure could include ATP shortage, where if cells are deprived of ATP, the cells may not have enough energy to perform essential functions such as muscle contractions and synthesizing proteins. Another one could include anaerobic respiration or glycolysis, where it is a process that produces energy without oxygen. However, a byproduct is lactic acid, which could lead to muscle fatigue. Lastly, it could also include cell death and organ failure. Without sufficient ATP, cells lose power to run essential functions, leading to a chain of effects that may end with necrosis. If cellular respiration were to also fail on a mass scale, it could ultimately lead to tissue and organ failure.
And then we are going to move on to the photosynthesis part of this presentation. So first, we're going to start with what is photosynthesis?
Okay, so what is photosynthesis? Photosynthesis is the process by which green plants and certain other organisms transfer light energy into chemical energy. So the process, to make it easier for us to understand, it's in goes the carbon dioxide, water, and light, and out comes glucose, water, and oxygen. And glucose is just basic sugar. So when the carbon dioxide, water, and light goes in, a light hits a plant's leaf and it shines onto chloroplasts, which are the green, chloroplasts and diploid membranes filled with chlorophyll, and that is the green pigmentation for which that's how our plants get the green color. And chlorophyll absorbs the light energy. The next step is to take that energy from the light reaction and apply it to a process called the Calvin cycle, and that'll be later discussed. The plant goes through the photosynthesis, producing carbohydrates, which is an important food that we eat, particularly grains, potatoes, fruits, and vegetables. The importance of photosynthesis is if we don't have that, then we have little to no food or other organic matter in the earth, which means that we don't have a lot of the food that we have today to eat.
Nice. And then we'll move on to the steps.
All right, so the light-dependent reaction is the first stage of photosynthesis where light energy is converted to ATP and NADPH. It is located in the diploid membrane of the chloroplast. And during its process, it captures light energy using chlorophyll pigments, and it releases water molecules, oxygen, protons, and electrons. The light excites the electrons, which travels through the electron transport chain, and it loses energy and pumps protons into the diploid. The protons would flow through the ATP synthase and generates ATP, and the electron flows through the NADP reductase and generates NADPH.
And next is the Calvin cycle.
The Calvin cycle is a process that plants use to turn carbon dioxide into sugar. There are three stages. The first is fixation, the second is reduction, and the third is regeneration. Without this chemical process, plants will struggle to grow and unable to produce glucose.
All right. And then we have uses.
What photosynthesis is used for? It helps plants create their own food and converting light into chemical energy. It's also used to convert carbon dioxide and other things to create a byproduct of oxygen, which we need. It also creates, it regulates the carbon dioxide we have in the atmosphere. Who uses photosynthesis? Algae, plants, and some bacteria use photosynthesis.
And next is modifications.
So we're going to talk about the modifications in some of the photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Plants don't all live in perfect conditions. Some are in deserts, some are in like the underwater, and some are in super hot places. Now, not all plants perform photosynthesis the same way. Some have more developed modifications to survive in extreme environments, and others, these modifications help them absorb carbon dioxide and conserve water or use alternate energy sources. Unlike humans and animals, plants don't need to hunt or cook or go to the grocery to go shopping. Instead, they make their own food using a process called photosynthesis. This process allows the plants to survive, grow, and even give us the oxygen we need to breathe. Photosynthesis is like a plant's superpower. As you can see in the picture of the process of photosynthesis of the sunflower, it lets them turn sunlight into food. Or you could just like think about it as like a recipe where the ingredients are sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide. The sunflower mixes these ingredients together inside their leaves and creates something they can eat, and like a special kind of like a cook. And what they make is the sugar called glucose. Now, an excellent example of cellular respiration is the cactus plant, because the cactus uses the water-saving uh, respiration technique. The cacti has like this smart modification in cellular respiration that helps them survive in deserts. They store carbon dioxide at night and use it during the day so that they don't lose water in the heat. Unlike most plants, cacti keep their stomata. The stomata has like the tiny pores closed during the day to prevent water loss in the scorching heat. And at night in the desert, to absorb carbon dioxide, they open their stomata to collect the carbon dioxide. And when it's cooler and it has like this less water getting evaporated from them. And this adaptation allows the cactuses or the cacti to go long periods without rain and reduces water loss usually up to like 95% compared to plants that photosynthesize normally.
All right. And our next slide is on what happens when photosynthesis fails.
All right. So some factors that could contribute to the failure of photosynthesis could be a lack of sunlight, whether the plant could be in a very shaded area or like in an area where there's no sunlight at all. There could also be lack of water or CO2. There could also be a significant change in temperature that could affect its function of photosynthesis, such as very, very cold temperatures or extremely hot temperatures. There could also be damage to the chloroplasts, which are the organelles in a plant cell, which converts the sunlight into energy. So when it's damaged, it can't properly convert the sunlight into energy, causing a deficiency in the function of a plant. So this could affect the plant very significantly. Since photosynthesis is like its main source, its main way of trying to get energy with the sunlight, most plants could die within a short period of time. And when photosynthesis fails, it not only affects the plant, but it could also affect the environment around it. So let's say that when the photosynthesis fails, most of the plants in an area dies. The food source of many animals that depend on those plants also get affected as they don't have a food source anymore. So basically the food chain could also potentially collapse. Since also plants also create a byproduct of oxygen, if there are no more plants to create the oxygen, there could also be a deficiency of oxygen in that environment.
All right. And that is the end of our slideshow for today. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. But hopefully, as Trisha outlined, you'll be able to see that these processes are very interconnected, and that they influence life at a very significant level. And these are processes, molecules that you'll encounter multiple times throughout your career through biology and medicine. And so hopefully this serves as like an introduction and in the future when you encounter these concepts again, you'll be more familiar with it and be able to pick up on that. So thank you so much, Trisha, and the interns for putting this together. And I hope everybody learned something new.